High in the mountains, far from the bustle of the city life, stood a secluded cabin, a perfect retreat for Sarah, a writer seeking inspiration and solitude. As she arrived, she noticed signs of recent habitation: a kettle on the stove, a book left open on the table, and a sense of lingering presence. Intrigued, Sarah explored the cabin and found an old journal tucked under the bed. Its entries, signed only with the initial D, chronicled strange experiences and unsettling thoughts. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, a knock echoed throughout the cabin. At the door stood Daniel, a man in his 30s with an air of mystery. He claimed to be a hiker who had lost his way. Despite her initial wariness, Sarah offered him shelter, grateful for the company. They spent the evening talking, sharing stories over a warm fire. Days passed, and Daniel's presence became a comforting routine. Yet as Sarah delved deeper into the journal, the entries grew darker, filled with paranoia and dread. The writer spoke of whispers in the night, unseen eyes watching from the shadows, and a profound fear of losing oneself. Strange occurrences began to plague Sarah. At night, she heard footsteps outside, and objects seemed to move on their own. Her writing, once vibrant and full of life, became bleak and foreboding, echoing the despair in the journal. She began to suspect Daniel knew more than he let on. One stormy evening, Sarah confronted Daniel. She thrust the journal at him, demanding answers. Daniel's expression darkened as he took the book, his eyes reflecting a deep sorrow.
"I am D,"
he admitted, his voice low.
"I lived here once, but I'm not what you think."
Confusion and fear churned within Sarah.
What do you mean? You're standing right here.
Daniel's gaze bore into hers.
"You're not seeing the truth, Sarah. The journal."
Sarah's mind raced, piecing together fragments of her memory.
You wrote this, didn't you?
She insisted, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Daniel sighed deeply.
"It's more complicated than that."
Before he could explain, the cabin seemed to come alive with a chilling presence. Shadows danced on the walls, and whispers returned, louder and louder, and more insistent. Sarah's vision blurred, reality slipping through her fingers. Desperate to escape, she ran outside into the storm. The wind howled and rain lashed her face as she stumbled through the forest. Daniel's voice echoed behind her, a warning plea mingled with sorrow and regret.
"Sarah, you have to understand."
She didn't stop until she reached the edge of a cliff, the cabin a distant glow behind her. Panting and drenched, she turned to face Daniel, who had followed her, his form flickering in the storm's fury.
"Can't run from yourself."
Sarah shook her head, tears mixing in the rain.
What are you talking about?
In a final heart-wrenching moment, Daniel reached out, placing the journal in her hands.
"Read the last entry."
With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the journal to the final page. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the familiar handwriting, her own handwriting. The truth hit her like a tidal wave. The journal was hers. She had written every word, documented every fear, and descent into madness. Daniel's form began to waver, dissolving in the mist.
"You created me to survive the solitude, Sarah. I'm part of you."
Sarah fell to her knees, the journal slipping from her grasp. The storm raged on, but inside, she felt a profound stillness, a confrontation with the depths of her own mind. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of her own making. As dawn broke, Sarah sat on the cliff's edge, staring into the horizon. The boundaries between reality and delusion had blurred, leaving her adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Daniel was gone, a ghost of her forgotten past, a creation of her fractured psyche. The mountain cabin stood silent, a solitary witness to the unraveling of a mind. Sarah's story, one of isolation and desperation, echoed through the empty halls. As the first light of the day touched the mountains, she faced the truth of her existence, unsure of where reality ended and delusion began. And so, in the heart of the mountains, the tale of Sarah and the forgotten man lingered, a haunting reminder of the fragile line between sanity and madness.